Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show where we unearth the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from a stack of sources, articles, research, our own notes. Our mission is to give you a shortcut to being truly well-informed, with surprising facts and just enough clarity to keep you hooked. Today, we're diving into a question that's gripping the world: Middle East tensions. Will Iran and Israel escalate into full-scale war? Are we in fact truly on the brink of a full-scale conflict between these two nations? It's an alarming prospect, and for this deep dive, we've gone through a recent detailed Chinese language analysis, among other materials, to try and get to the heart of what's unfolding.
That's right. The situation is undeniably tense, and the stakes couldn't be higher for the region and indeed the world. Our goal on the deep dive is always to help you look beyond the headlines and truly understand the intricate layers beneath them. What stands out from our source material is a nuanced perspective that reveals not only the immediate actions, but also the underlying calculations and potential trajectories of this conflict. Understanding these subtleties is absolutely key to making sense of this volatile situation. So let's unpack this and explore how these current military tensions could evolve into full-scale regional warfare, or perhaps what might still prevent it.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to start right where the recent escalation truly kicked off, June 13th. Now, what's particularly striking about this date, according to our source, is just how unexpected Israel's initial military actions were, even to many Israelis themselves. I mean, can you believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu's son, Avner, had his wedding scheduled for June 16th, just 3 days after these massive airstrikes began?
Yeah, that's quite something.
This anecdote, while personal, actually illustrates a powerful and rather chilling point. For political leaders, strategic calculations can, and often do, override deeply personal events, signaling an urgent national priority. The timing was inconvenient, to say the least, yet the operation went ahead.
Indeed, that timing points to a very calculated decision. The Israeli airstrikes were launched at 2 a.m. on June 13th. And in a clear indication of Israel's preparedness for the inevitable retaliation, by 2:59 a.m., air raid sirens were blaring nationwide, instructing civilians to take shelter.
Wow, less than an hour.
Exactly. This preemptive measure really highlights Israel's long-standing experience with conflict and its highly organized civil defense. What's remarkable here is how ingrained civil defense is in Israeli daily life. New buildings in Tel Aviv, for example, are now mandated to have what they call public safety rooms.
Public safety rooms.
Yeah. These aren't just basements. They're designed with thick, reinforced concrete walls, steel doors, and even air filtration systems to defend against potential chemical weapons. And it's not just new infrastructure. Older buildings also maintain well-kept air raid shelters, a testament to decades of sustained national preparedness.
And the experience for civilians during these periods of intense conflict is genuinely unlike anything many of us can imagine. My journalist friend in Tel Aviv shared a vivid account. She, like many others, spent from 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. that morning sheltering in her apartment building's safety room, waiting for the all-clear.
8 hours.
8 hours. When she finally emerged around midday, she saw a rush at the supermarkets. People were scrambling to buy food and water. This wasn't just a spontaneous reaction. It was a direct response to Netanyahu's televised speech earlier that morning, where he indicated that the military operation against Iran would likely last for about 2 weeks. The message was clear. Prepare for a sustained period of heightened alert. Israeli schools, restaurants, and many entertainment venues across the country were closed for the entire day on June 13th. However, despite the alarm, the overall market order remained relatively normal, largely due to the citizens' prior experience with similar situations.
This public reaction isn't new. Israeli citizens have a grim familiarity with conflict. Our source notes that the country had already endured 2 significant missile attacks from Iran in April and October of the previous year, not to mention ballistic missile and drone attacks from Houthi forces. This history has tragically created a kind of routine. Many urban residents automatically know to seek shelter.
It's just become part of life.
In a way, yes. Some even reportedly sleep in their bunkers during the more predictable nightly Iranian counterattacks, which often occur between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m., and then again from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. It's a disturbing rhythm of life, where air raid sirens become a regular, almost mundane part of the evening and early morning. The profound implication here is that Israeli society, despite its prosperity, lives in a constant state of readiness, accepting these disruptions as a fundamental aspect of their reality.
And when Iran did retaliate, it wasn't a token response. My friend described the aftermath in Tel Aviv. Widespread debris, visibly damaged buildings, and numerous cars with shattered windows lining the streets, even in areas closer to the city center. This really underscores the intensity of Iran's counterattacks, indicating that they were far from completely defenseless. They certainly managed to inflict damage.
They did, yes, they absolutely did. But Iran was undoubtedly the side that sustained far heavier losses. Israeli precision airstrikes caused significant damage to a wide array of Iranian assets: nuclear facilities, ballistic missile factories, critical air defense systems, and major military airports. Take the Natanz nuclear facility, for instance. Initially, UN nuclear experts believed only the ground facilities were damaged.
Okay.
However, just a day later, more detailed satellite and aerial photos confirmed severe damage to its underground workshops as well. Israeli military estimates are quite specific. They claim to have destroyed approximately 40% of Iran's ballistic missile launchers, 30% of its nuclear facilities, and over 100 air-to-ground missile launchers.
That's a huge percentage.
It is. And beyond military targets, economic infrastructure was also hit. 2 natural gas fields in southern Iran were bombed and caught fire. The profound implication here isn't just about the sheer damage, it's that Israel, through these precise strikes, has effectively crippled Iran's conventional strike capability, forcing a complete recalculation of their strategic options and perhaps revealing a deeper vulnerability than previously imagined.
And it wasn't just airstrikes, right? The Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, reportedly conducted targeted assassinations of high-ranking Iranian military officials and scientists within Iran. Our source mentions that Iranian media themselves disclosed the deaths of the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, the IRGC commander, the Aerospace Force commander, and the Air Defense Force commander. These are incredibly significant losses that speak to a deep level of intelligence penetration, reaching the very top of Iran's military and scientific leadership.
Absolutely. The human cost for Iran was also substantial. The Iranian Health Ministry reported over 220 military personnel and civilians killed, and more than 1,200 injured. The cumulative effect of these attacks has been devastating. Iran has effectively lost air superiority, meaning it can no longer guarantee the safety of its major cities or even its vital military infrastructure. This dire situation was publicly highlighted when former U.S. President Trump, on June 17th, issued a public call for Tehran residents to evacuate.
Trump told them to evacuate.
Yes. He essentially stated that Tehran's airspace was now open for Israeli and American air power, a profoundly humiliating external acknowledgement of Iran's failure to protect its own people and its skies. This underscores a critical vulnerability. Iran, for all its missile capabilities, struggles significantly with air defense against a sophisticated adversary.
So Iran took a heavy hit. But Israel wasn't unscathed either, right? Our source indicates that Iran retaliated fiercely with its own arsenal.
That's correct. Despite their air defense issues, Iran launched over 400 ballistic missiles in just 6 days, an average of more than 60 missiles per day. Wow.
While Israel's advanced defense systems like the Iron Dome, along with U.S. TAED and Patriot systems, these are, high altitude and medium range defense systems. Yeah. Basically, the next line of defense after Iron Dome intercepted a majority of these. The missiles were primarily aimed at densely populated Israeli cities. This approach, known as a saturation attack, is essentially where you launch so many projectiles at once that even the most sophisticated defenses get overwhelmed, guaranteeing some will get through.
And some did get through.
And they did. Haifa's major oil refinery, a critical northern port, was struck and forced to cease operations. Government buildings in Tel Aviv, including the Israeli military headquarters, also sustained hits. The Israeli military reported 24 deaths and nearly 600 injuries, which, strikingly, is comparable to the damage from last year's large-scale Iranian missile attacks. This suggests that even Israel's formidable air defense systems were under immense pressure, absorbing a very high volume of attacks and highlighting the sheer volume of Iran's retaliation capability despite its defensive shortcomings. What's truly striking here, and what sets this conflict apart from typical modern warfare, is the vast geographical distance between the combatants. Iran and Israel are separated by over 1,000 kilometers. That's a significant distance, roughly equivalent to flying from, say, London to Rome.
Right, or maybe Beijing to Shanghai.
Exactly. They are not neighboring countries, and they don't share contiguous control zones or borders, unlike most armed conflicts we are familiar with, from world wars to border skirmishes.
Exactly. This geographical separation is highly unusual for a conflict of this intensity. Yet, despite this significant distance, both sides are deploying advanced military assets, fighter jets, ballistic missiles, and drones to continuously attack each other's core military installations and major cities for days on end. What's even more remarkable is the range of these strikes. The longest Israeli strike reportedly reached nearly 3,000 kilometers into Iranian territory, illustrating an extraordinary projection of power across vast distances.
3,000 kilometers. That's deep.
Very deep. Furthermore, a crucial diplomatic anomaly defines this conflict. Israel and Iran have had no diplomatic relations for over 40 years, since early 1979. This means they lack any direct channel for communication, even in a state of active conflict.
So you have two non-neighboring countries engaging in a sustained high-tech exchange of blows across vast distances using significant military hardware. Yet there's no formal declaration of war, no genuine diplomatic mediation attempting to de-escalate. It's truly an undefined state of conflict, continuing to unfold without clear boundaries or established communication. This is a very dangerous situation because without those channels, miscalculation becomes so much more likely, potentially spiraling out of control faster than either side might intend.
Precisely. And this leads us to three core judgments on the conflict's trajectory, according to our analysis. My first judgment is that the political objectives of this conflict have significantly expanded in the past few days. This expansion has led to higher intensity military strikes and, critically, a more uncontrollable development trajectory.
That's a powerful claim. How so? What was the initial objective and how did it change so dramatically?
Okay, so initially, Israel's justification for the June 13th airstrikes was framed as a preemptive attack to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons within a year. The argument was that Iran, given its long-standing hostility towards Israel, would use nuclear weapons to threaten Israel's very existence. So Israel claimed it was acting purely in self-preservation. This seemed, at first glance, to be a purely military objective. Neutralize Iran's potential to build and deliver nuclear weapons by striking facilities and missile launchers. Even the G7 at their summit this week issued a statement supporting Israel's actions based on this logic, emphasizing the threat of a nuclear Iran to regional security. A military objective pursued by military means in that specific context had a certain logical consistency.
Right, makes sense on paper.
But here's where the nature of the conflict fundamentally shifted. By June 16th, just 3 days after the initial strikes, Prime Minister Netanyahu's public statements took a sharp turn. In a televised address, he declared that Israel's ultimate goal was to end Iran's religious regime and definitively eliminate its external threat, even hinting at the possibility of assassinating Supreme Leader Khamenei himself.
Whoa, from preventing nukes to regime change and targeting the Supreme Leader.
Exactly. Do you see the profound change here? This transformed a limited, militarily focused problem into a complex, sprawling, and potentially uncontrollable political one. The surprising insight is that what began as a defensive strike quickly morphed into an overtly offensive political aim.
That's a massive escalation of intent. It's no longer just about capability, but about the very structure of the Iranian state. But practically speaking, how would a regime change even be achieved? And what would the aftermath be like for Iran and the wider region?
These are precisely the critical unanswered questions, and they highlight the immense risks. Would it be through more targeted assassinations of high-ranking officials? Would Israel try to foster an external proxy? Or would it involve a ground invasion? Our source highlights that none of these scenarios are clear, and any such process would be utterly uncontrollable. Think about it. We've seen how Israel has struggled immensely with the political issues involving 4 million Palestinians in Gaza, leading to ongoing chaos.
Right.
How then can it realistically manage the overthrow of a 90 million person state like Iran, especially one with such a deep-seated, complex religious and military structure? The implications are terrifying. Mass refugee crises, humanitarian disasters, widespread internal chaos. And here's the crucial point. Israel, not being a direct neighbor, wouldn't bear the direct costs of Iran's internal collapse. That burden would fall heavily on surrounding Arab states and potentially even Europe if there's a large-scale refugee exodus. It effectively externalizes the chaos, making the conflict's trajectory far more unpredictable and potentially destabilizing for the entire global neighborhood.
That makes perfect sense, connecting it to the larger regional and global context.
Yeah.
So what's your second judgment on the conflict's trajectory?
My second judgment is that due to the severe lack of direct dialogue mechanisms between Israel and Iran, coupled with significant information asymmetry and a limited willingness from external powers to mediate, this conflict, at present, simply cannot be effectively controlled. This is a critical insight. Without proper communication, missteps are almost guaranteed.
Let's rewind a bit to understand this lack of communication. What's the history of Israel-Iran relations? When did they lose these channels?
Well, formal diplomatic relations between Israel and Iran were severed in early 1979 following Iran's Islamic Revolution. However, it's a little-known fact that even after the break, throughout the 1980s and into the early 1990s, Israel and Iran actually maintained frequent secret contacts.
Really? Secret contacts? Why?
Yeah. The reason was the Iran-Iraq War that erupted in 1980. Israel at the time viewed Iraq as the greater, more immediate threat. So during that 8-year war, Israel actually secretly sold arms and equipment to Iran.
Wow, okay. Didn't know that.
It wasn't until the early 1990s, during Prime Minister Rabin's tenure, that relations rapidly deteriorated, primarily because Israel perceived Iran's increasing support for various proxy groups in the Persian Gulf region as a direct threat to Israeli national security. This adversarial stance only deepened in the 21st century, particularly around events like the Syrian civil war, the internal situation in Lebanon, and the latest rounds of conflict in Gaza. The key outcome of this deterioration is that there is simply no longer any normal communication mechanism between them.
Okay, so no direct line.
None. This lack of formal communication exacerbates miscalculations and misunderstandings. Both sides are largely operating on assumptions about the other's intentions, which is incredibly dangerous in a volatile situation. And here's another layer of complexity. While Iran often views Israel and the United States as a monolithic entity, the reality is that there are significant divergences in views, especially concerning Iran's nuclear program, despite their alliance. Israel, for example, has consistently pushed for unilateral strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities for over 30 years and has been preparing for such a possibility for just as long.
30 years.
They even proposed joint large-scale attacks with the U.S. at least twice. What's compelling here is that in early 2020, after the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad, Israel reportedly approached then-President Trump, suggesting a joint air campaign to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities and potentially force regime collapse. But Trump, assessing the risks as too high, rejected that plan.
So if the U.S. wasn't willing to go along then, what changed now to allow for these large-scale Israeli strikes? What enabled Trump's shift from caution to what appears to be acquiescence?
Our source suggests that the current large-scale Israeli strikes followed 2 months and 5 rounds of unsuccessful nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran, which had been going on since April. This stalemate appears to have led to Trump's tacit approval or acquiescence for Israel to proceed with its own military solution. Trump had previously publicly stated he didn't want the situation to escalate to a point where Israel would launch unilateral strikes. However, as the talks faltered, he effectively gave Israel the green light.
So the failed talks were the trigger for the green light.
It seems that way. The critical information gap here is that Iran doesn't fully grasp the extent of the disagreements between the U.S. and Israel, nor does it fully comprehend Trump's true intentions regarding military action. This poor information flow prevents mutual understanding of intentions, making the situation even more volatile and prone to miscalculation.
And mediation isn't really happening either.
Exactly. And this information asymmetry is compounded by a striking lack of effective mediation. While the European Union, several Gulf states, and Turkey have diplomatically condemned Israel's actions, no major international actor has stepped forward to genuinely mediate a ceasefire or a resolution. The source suggests this is primarily because any mediation would be futile without decisive U.S. action, especially if Israel perceives itself as maintaining a battlefield advantage. Under current circumstances, if Israel holds the upper hand on the battlefield, any mediation without decisive U.S. commitment is unlikely to yield practical results. So after 6 days of conflict, there is still no effective control over the escalation, and the diplomatic tools for de-escalation appear remarkably absent.
That brings us to your third core judgment. This one seems to be the elephant in the room, dictating the course for the coming days, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. My third judgment is that the most crucial point of observation for the coming week in the Israel-Iran conflict will be whether the United States directly participates in military strikes against Iran. Until June 13th, the U.S. had maintained a clear stance. U.S. forces in the Middle East would assist Israel only in intercepting Iranian missiles, but they would not actively engage in offensive strikes against Iran or participate in Israel's bombing campaigns.
But then something shifted dramatically on June 17th with Trump's statement. What changed in his calculus, and what are the tangible signs of this shift?
Exactly. On June 17th, after a day of national security meetings, Trump's rhetoric took a sharp turn. He publicly declared that continued resistance was meaningless for Iran, demanding Iran's unconditional surrender and the immediate permanent cessation of its nuclear program and the conflict. He wasn't interested in a temporary ceasefire. He demanded a permanent end to the conflict, effectively requiring Iran to surrender. This public statement strongly implied the possibility of direct U.S. intervention, a significant and concerning escalation from previous U.S. postures.
And it wasn't just talk. There were actual military moves.
Correct. And this wasn't just rhetoric. Concrete evidence of U.S. preparations quickly emerged. Global open-source intelligence and specialized military media noted the swift deployment of aerial refueling aircraft and strategic supplies to the Persian Gulf region. The USS Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group was already present, and the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group began moving towards the Middle East, signaling a clear posture of pressure, if not imminent engagement. Meanwhile, Israeli military officials have stated that their future targets will include underground bunkers and facilities associated with high-ranking Iranian military and political leaders. This indicates that Israeli airstrikes are expected to continue for at least another week.
So, the critical questions for the coming days then are stark. Will the U.S. directly intervene with offensive action? Will B-2 stealth bombers, specifically designed for deep penetration, attack Iran's deepest underground nuclear facilities? How will Iran escalate its retaliation if the U.S. directly engages? And what would all of this mean for Middle Eastern energy security, which, as we've discussed, impacts the entire world? This really is the major point of observation, and the implications could truly be global. Let's transition now from these broader judgments to a deeper dive into the specific military dimensions of this conflict. What's the first key military characteristic you're observing on the ground, or rather in the air?
The first point, which might sound paradoxical, is that this is a short-term war of attrition. You might typically associate attrition with long, drawn-out conflicts. However, here, it's driven by the fact that both sides possess limited quantities of their most effective offensive weapons, and neither can fully self-produce these critical assets.
Okay, limited stockpiles on both sides.
Exactly. If they hope to achieve strategic advantage in the early stages of the conflict, they must project these assets in large quantities and rapidly. This leads to a quick depletion of their stockpiles, creating a race against time, where each side tries to exhaust the other's critical munitions quickly. The underlying insight here is that the conflict's intensity is inversely proportional to its expected duration. It's a sprint, not a marathon.
So what exactly are Iran's primary offensive assets in this short-term attrition sprint?
Iran's primary advantage lies in its ground-to-ground ballistic missiles. Israeli intelligence estimates Iran possesses around 3,000 such missiles, with approximately 2,000 of those having a range exceeding 1,000 kilometers, making them capable of reaching Israel.
2,000 missiles that can hit Israel.
That's the estimate. These 2,000 missiles are reportedly deployed on about 600 launchers. This represents Iran's most crucial strategic asset for long-range, high-impact attacks. While Iran also has substantial drone capabilities, our source points out that drones fly much slower than ballistic missiles. Given the more than 1,000-kilometer separation between Iran and Israel, these slower drones are far easier for Israeli air defenses to detect and intercept, so the ballistic missiles are their key strategic asset for long-range attacks.
And their defense is weak, as you mentioned.
On the defensive side, Iran's weaknesses are glaring. Its air defense network, which includes Russian S-300 systems and domestically produced missiles, was severely crippled by Israeli airstrikes in April and especially in October of the previous year. Crucially, the core radar facilities of this network were largely destroyed. This explains Iran's almost complete inability to resist the initial Israeli airstrikes on June 13th. Their defensive capabilities had been critically degraded to the point where they could barely retaliate. This is a critical insight into why Israel could achieve such early air superiority.
That explains why Iran was so vulnerable. What about Israel's offensive capabilities in this type of attrition warfare?
Israel's primary offensive power against Iran comes from its nearly 300 advanced fighter jets, including F-15s, F-16s, and particularly its latest F-35s. However, these advanced jets face a significant operational limitation. Their combat radius is simply not sufficient for a round trip from Israeli territory to Iran's main targets without aerial refueling.
Ah, the refueling constraint.
Exactly. And Israel possesses only 8 aerial refueling aircraft. This means Israel cannot deploy all its jets simultaneously in a single massive wave. For example, the June 13th operation, which involved over 200 planes, had to be conducted in 6 distinct waves, coordinated around these limited refueling assets. While Iran claimed to have shot down an F-35, there's no conclusive evidence to support any Israeli aircraft losses, according to our source.
And the cost must be enormous.
The munitions carried by these combat aircraft, such as advanced air-launched ballistic missiles and precision-guided ground attack munitions, are also finite in number. A significant portion of these are imported, primarily from the United States. The cost of this conflict for Israel is staggering. According to Israeli media estimates, even without suffering direct aircraft losses, Israel is expending an estimated $1.3 billion daily on fuel and ammunition, much of which is imported from the U.S.
$1.3 billion a day.
That's the estimate. This immense cost explains Netanyahu's stated 2-week operational timeline for the air campaign. The goal is to exhaust their high-performance munitions to decisively destroy Iran's conventional military forces within that window. For Iran, the strategy in this attrition is to rapidly launch its approximately 2,000 long-range missiles in a saturation attack to overwhelm Israel's sophisticated air defense systems, the Iron Dome, and the U.S.-deployed Thaad and Patriot batteries. While these systems are highly effective and have gained valuable experience over the past year, they also have limited missile stockpiles. Iran's aim is to deplete Israel's defensive capabilities, thereby increasing the probability of later missiles breaking through. So it's a frantic race against the clock for both sides, trying to inflict maximum damage before their most potent, limited supply weapons are exhausted. The side that can maximize the destructive power of its limited munitions within this short time frame will likely hold a more advantageous position in any subsequent political negotiation. This reveals a critical strategic dynamic. It's less about who has more, and more about who can use what they have most effectively before it runs out.
It's a high-stakes, time-limited race. Now, onto the second military dimension. What can you tell us about Israel's tactical victory? Was it a complete success, or is there a crucial caveat?
Israel has undeniably achieved significant tactical successes. As we mentioned, they've largely destroyed Iran's air defense network and inflicted substantial damage to ground structures at the Natanz nuclear facility. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has assessed that Natanz's underground facility, which houses thousands of advanced centrifuges, suffered significant damage due to power loss and severe vibrations during the Israeli strikes. It's akin to high-precision machinery experiencing sudden damaging power cuts, leading to severe damage to delicate equipment. So, definite tactical victory there.
But you said incomplete.
However, yes, this victory is incomplete, particularly concerning Iran's nuclear program. There are significant remaining concerns. Iran has a large, hardened underground nuclear facility at Fordo, near the religious city of Qom, which appears to be largely undamaged. Additionally, a new underground enrichment plant south of Natanz has also escaped significant harm. Israel itself admits that its advanced jets and current munitions simply cannot penetrate bunkers located 40 to 50 meters deep, especially those that are heavily reinforced.
40 to 50 meters deep. That's really buried.
It is. This capability at present is exclusive to the United States, utilizing assets like B-2 bombers equipped with specialized bunker-busting bombs, which often require multiple strikes to be effective.
So only the U.S. can really take those out?
Currently, yes. Even more alarmingly, by the end of May, Iran had refined approximately 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. This amount is theoretically sufficient for 10 nuclear warheads. However, the current location of this enriched uranium is unknown.
Unknown. They don't know where it is.
The location is uncertain. While IAEA inspectors still present in Iran have not detected any radiation leaks around known facilities, the sheer fact that this material is unaccounted for is a massive concern. The critical insight here is that until this enriched uranium is located and secured, or if underground enrichment activities continue undetected, Israel cannot claim to have fully neutralized Iran's nuclear threat. Therefore, the total eradication of Iran's nuclear capabilities as a complete objective hinges critically on direct U.S. military intervention. Without it, Israel's impressive tactical gains remain strategically limited in this crucial area they've damaged, but not definitively disarmed.
That's a sobering assessment. It really underscores the reliance on potential U.S. action. This brings us to the third military dimension, which is often a flashpoint in any Middle East conflict, the Strait of Hormuz.
Ah, yes, the Strait of Hormuz. Undeniably one of the world's most critical choke points. Roughly 20% of the world's seaborne crude oil and liquefied natural gas, or LNG, passes through this narrow waterway. It's the primary export route for oil from countries like Iran, Iraq, and the UAE to global markets. A blockade of this strait, as Iran has threatened multiple times over the years, could have catastrophic consequences for the global economy. Global oil prices could surge by $20 to $30 per barrel almost overnight, causing a massive economic shock.
$20 to $30 a barrel. Just like that.
Potentially, yes. What's interesting is Iran's current restraint regarding the strait. Despite the ongoing conflict, Iran has not moved to block it. This is likely due to its significantly weakened military capabilities following the recent Israeli airstrikes and a genuine fear of direct, massive retaliation from the United States. Iran appears to be prioritizing its strikes against Israel and issuing warnings to the U.S. against intervention, aiming to avoid creating more enemies or a wider existential conflict with a superpower.
But that could change if the U.S. gets involved directly.
Absolutely. However, if the U.S. were to directly intervene with the explicit goal of regime change in Iran, essentially threatening the survival of the Islamic Republic, Iran's calculus would shift dramatically. Faced with an existential threat, Iran would likely disregard international implications and potentially blockade the strait or directly attack U.S. military bases in the Middle East.
Okay, so U.S. intervention is the key trigger there, too.
It appears to be. Now, there are some mitigating factors. The current global economic slowdown means that overall oil demand isn't exceptionally high right now. Furthermore, even if Hormuz were blocked, oil exports from Saudi Arabia's west coast, as well as from Russia and some African countries, would continue. So while it wouldn't cause a global oil famine, it would still create massive disruption and volatility in world markets. Given the global economic uncertainties of 2025, including ongoing tariff wars, a blockade in the Strait of Hormuz would likely impose significant costs on countries worldwide, regardless of their direct involvement.
So even though we hear about renewable energy and AI, this is a stark reminder that geopolitical conflicts, especially in the Middle East, directly impact global energy prices and the world economy. It underscores that reliance on Middle Eastern fossil fuels is far from a history topic in 2025. It's still profoundly relevant to your daily life and the global economic landscape, affecting everything from gas prices to supply chains. Now, let's pivot to the political dimensions of this conflict, which are just as complex as the military ones. What's your first key judgment here?
My first political judgment is that Israel's attacks on civilian and economic targets have inadvertently fueled anti-Israel sentiment among the Iranian populace. This, ironically, actually hinders Israel's stated objective of rapidly achieving regime change within Iran. This is a crucial, perhaps unintended, consequence.
How does that work? Attacking them makes them less likely to want regime change.
It seems counterintuitive, but yes. To understand this, we need to look at Iran's internal situation. The country has faced decades of economic sanctions, primarily from the U.S. and Europe, though other countries continue to trade. This has led to persistent economic and social instability. Public protests, often rooted in these economic realities rather than purely religious issues, have become far more frequent. Historically, Iran saw nationwide anti-government protests every 7 to 8 years in the early 21st century. But from 2018 onwards, it's been roughly every 2 years, indicating growing internal discontent.
Okay, so there was already significant discontent.
Yes. A large portion of Iran's significant energy revenues, instead of being invested in improving living conditions, has been diverted to supporting military proxies across the Middle East, like the Syrian regime, Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iraqi Shiite militias, and funding its domestic nuclear and ballistic missile programs. For instance, our source notes Iran is still producing 50 new ballistic missiles monthly. These are significant financial commitments, often at the expense of its own citizens.
50 missiles a month.
Yeah.
While people are struggling.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is Iran's unique dual-track political and military system. The religious establishment, led by the supreme leader, and the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, holds the true power. This is distinct from the presidential administration, which handles daily governance. The IRGC, for example, controls independent financial resources and military forces, with IRGC-affiliated businesses reportedly controlling 30% to 50% of Iran's GDP. This concentration of wealth and power within the clerical elite fuels significant public discontent over wealth distribution and the regime's priorities, especially given the country's rapid population growth to over 90 million people now, compared to less than 40 million 40 years ago, without commensurate improvements in infrastructure or job opportunities. Many young people, especially those moving to cities, face insufficient job opportunities.
And the recent strikes seem to have exposed a critical vulnerability in the Iranian regime's competence, particularly regarding public safety. What was the impact of that?
They did. The Iranian government issued no warnings to its citizens before or during the Israeli airstrikes, nor did it make any visible preparations for civilian shelters. This was a striking failure. Trump's public call for Tehran residents to evacuate on June 17th, telling them their government couldn't protect them, served as a profoundly humiliating external acknowledgement of the regime's failure to protect its own people. It highlighted how deeply Israeli intelligence had penetrated Tehran, allowing for targeted assassinations of high-ranking officials right in the city. Yet, despite this internal discontent and demonstrated incompetence, Israel's actions may be inadvertently strengthening the current Iranian regime.
Strengthening them?
By specifically targeting civilian infrastructure, like the natural gas fields and oil refineries in southern Iran, and by conducting assassinations in residential areas that inevitably cause civilian casualties, Israel is perceived by ordinary Iranians as indiscriminately harming their lives and well-being. These economic targets, like the gas fields, have no direct connection to the nuclear program or military. Their destruction causes direct hardship. This, paradoxically, pushes a public that might otherwise be critical of their own government to rally against the external aggressor. It frames the conflict as an attack on the Iranian people, not just their leaders, effectively reducing internal dissent and making regime change from within less likely to be supported by the populace.
The rally around the flag effect.
Precisely. Furthermore, Israel has offered no clear post-regime change plan. If the current regime falls, who would govern? Iranians have witnessed the chaos in neighboring countries like Iraq and Syria, where regime collapse without a stable replacement led to widespread instability, making them inherently wary of externally imposed change. The surprising takeaway here is that Israel's aggressive actions might be inadvertently bolstering the very regime it seeks to overthrow.
So it's a self-defeating strategy in a way. Now, let's talk about another political dimension, how this new conflict affects the long-standing Gaza issue. Did it give Netanyahu a political reprieve?
It's clear that the Iran conflict has temporarily diverted attention from the immense pressure Netanyahu's government was facing over the Gaza war. Prior to June 13th, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the mounting international criticism, with countries like France and Britain even considering tariffs over food and medicine shortages, were consuming headlines. Domestically, Netanyahu himself was facing a no-confidence vote on June 12th. The Gaza war had cost Israel a staggering $8.8 billion in 1.5 years and exposed military manpower shortages, sparking a contentious debate over drafting ultra-Orthodox Jews who had previously been exempt from service.
Right, the draft issue was huge.
It was. The Iran conflict provided a convenient, albeit temporary, distraction and a measure of relief for his government.
But only temporary relief.
However, yes, this diversion is superficial and temporary. Just as Netanyahu has lacked an exit strategy for Gaza, he appears to equally lack one for the Iran conflict. His declared goal of regime collapse is an extreme, non-negotiable objective for Iran, offering no off-ramp for de-escalation. This raises critical questions about the endgame. What if Israel's 2-week bombing campaign fails to destroy Iran's deeply buried nuclear facilities? If the regime were to collapse, who would form a transitional government? Who would prevent a massive refugee crisis from Iran, or, even more dangerously, the proliferation of Iran's numerous ballistic missiles and other weapons to various factions, both internal and external? Israel has offered no solutions to these monumental problems, seemingly expecting the U.S. and other international actors to bear the burden and clean up the potential chaos. The core insight here is that while the Iranian conflict may buy Netanyahu time domestically, it's not a solution, but rather another highly complex quagmire without a clear exit.
This sounds like a recurring pattern in Israeli foreign policy then.
Yeah.
They're adept at initiating preemptive, militarily advantageous actions, but consistently struggle to devise and implement effective exit strategies for the political aftermath. It's almost as if the military solution is the focus, and the political resolution is an afterthought. Is that a fair assessment from our source?
It's a valid observation and one supported by the analysis. And this brings us to the third, crucial political dimension, which ties back to the role of the United States.
Okay, the U.S. role again. What's the point here?
My third point is that President Trump is demonstrably inclined to pursue a low-cost intervention strategy in the Middle East. His attitude is largely shaped by the terms offered by both Israel and Iran. Trump's approach to the Middle East has consistently shown an unwillingness to engage in costly new wars, such as those in Iraq or Afghanistan, which drain American resources and lives. However, he remains open to interventions that promise high personal and national prestige at minimal expense to the U.S.
Low cost, high reward.
Pretty much. Consider the appeal of the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, for Trump. If it were successfully revived, it would neutralize Iran's nuclear threat without direct U.S. financial burden. European, Saudi, Emirati, and Qatari companies would be the ones to invest in Iran, allowing its oil to re-enter the global market. The U.S. might even profit from building civilian nuclear power plants in Iran. It's a win-win scenario with minimal American outlay. Conversely, Trump's sudden shift on June 17th, demanding Iran's unconditional surrender and deploying carrier groups, also signals a move towards a low-cost intervention strategy. Our analysis suggests this shift is likely predicated on Prime Minister Netanyahu's assurance that Israel can successfully execute strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities unilaterally, with the U.S. providing only intelligence support, thereby avoiding direct combat risks.
So it becomes a calculation of risk and reward for the U.S. But what's the critical condition for Trump to actually commit U.S. military assets to this conflict?
Exactly. For the U.S., this is framed as a low-risk, high-reward strategy. If airstrikes alone can force Iran to abandon its nuclear program, it represents a significant foreign policy victory for Trump without the high costs associated with a ground invasion. It's an attractive proposition for a leader who values efficiency and clear wins. The critical condition is Netanyahu's ability to convince Trump that Israel can achieve the desired outcome, particularly neutralizing the nuclear threat, largely on its own, thereby limiting direct U.S. military exposure.
And what's Netanyahu's incentive in all this, beyond simply taking out Iran's nuclear capabilities?
Netanyahu, with his history of initiating bold military actions but struggling with exit strategies, desperately needs U.S. diplomatic and military backing to sustain his operations and manage any fallout. He must convince Trump that there is a viable exit strategy after the military objectives are achieved, even if Israel hasn't clearly articulated one publicly. On Iran's side, their leverage is quite limited. Their decision to withdraw from the scheduled June 15th nuclear talks, where they were meant to resume negotiations with the U.S. in Oman, further weakened their negotiating position.
Right, pulling out of the talks probably didn't help them.
Not at all. The only way for Iran to potentially dissuade Trump from supporting Israeli military action is to immediately accept the U.S.'s proposed nuclear deal, even if it entails humiliating concessions like completely abandoning all uranium enrichment activities.
So a complete capitulation on the nuclear front might be their only way out of U.S. intervention.
It might be their only remaining leverage point, yes. So, in essence, the terms and conditions offered by Israel, which are designed to secure U.S. involvement, and those from Iran, which are aimed at avoiding it, will ultimately determine whether the U.S. military directly enters this escalating conflict in the coming days. The surprising insight here is that a major superpower's involvement hinges on these very specific high-stakes negotiations between its ally and its adversary.
We've broken down the military and political layers. Let's now look at the broader diplomatic and international relations dimensions of this conflict. What's the first key takeaway here that impacts all of us globally?
My first point is that despite a decade of global energy diversification efforts, with solar, wind, and other renewable sources gaining traction, oil and natural gas from the Middle East remain fundamentally important for the economic functioning of most regions globally. This confirms the enduring geopolitical significance of the Middle East, a reality that hasn't diminished, contrary to some narratives.
Still all about the oil, basically.
In large part, yes. We saw immediate evidence of this on June 13th, the very day Israel launched its airstrikes. Global oil prices surged by 13% in under 12 hours due to widespread fears that Iran would immediately block the Strait of Hormuz. While prices later stabilized as Iran showed restraint, the market sensitivity remains incredibly high. To illustrate this, our source shared a recent anecdote. Just yesterday, 2 tankers collided near the Strait of Hormuz. What happened? It led to a rapid spread of fake news on social media, falsely claiming Iranian missile attacks on international vessels.
Wow. Even a collision sparked rumors of war.
Exactly. This demonstrates the pervasive fear and the direct, immediate connection between regional stability in the Middle East and global energy security. The critical insight here is that even minor disruptions in this region can send immediate, tangible shockwaves across global markets.
This really drives home the message for you, our listener. Despite all the discussions about AI, cutting-edge technologies, and green energy, old topics like Middle Eastern fossil fuels are still profoundly relevant in 2025. They continue to profoundly impact the global economy and the political landscape. It's not just history, it's happening right now and affecting everyone's pockets.
Exactly. And my second point in the diplomatic dimension, which is critically important, is that this conflict, much like the Russia-Ukraine war, highlights a persistent and dangerous belief among some leaders that military force can effectively and quickly change existing political realities. This ongoing conflict serves as a major test for the current world order.
The idea that you can just bomb your way to a political solution.
Precisely. We can draw a direct parallel to Israel's previous actions.
Last summer, Israel's military invasion of Lebanon, which was preceded by targeted attacks on Hezbollah's leadership and infrastructure, including attacks using pager devices and then direct assassinations of leaders, effectively marginalized Hezbollah politically. This provided Netanyahu's government with what they perceived as a successful model. The idea that overwhelming military superiority can indeed alter another country's political status quo swiftly and with minimal risk.
So they think the Lebanon model can work on Iran.
It seems that way. If you view the Lebanon example as a reference, Israel is arguably attempting to apply the same model to Iran. From Israel's perspective, Iran's religious elite, with their independent financial resources and armed forces, and their confrontational stance towards Israel, are akin to Lebanon's Hezbollah. This approach assumes that Israel can achieve regime change, or at least severely cripple the current regime, through military might, even if it means disregarding potential negative consequences should the operation fail or escalate beyond control.
But is this assumption truly sound? I mean, how long have the Gaza and Russia-Ukraine wars lasted? Can pure military might truly achieve complex political objectives like regime change, or are low-cost interventions as guaranteed as some leaders believe? There's a lot of skepticism and, frankly, fear about the effectiveness and ultimate safety of such strategies. What does our source say about the potential for miscalculation here?
That skepticism is well-founded, and the source echoes it. The duration of the Gaza war and the Russia-Ukraine conflict vividly demonstrates that military might alone often cannot achieve political ends easily or swiftly, and it leads to a deeper paradox in Israeli policy, its pursuit of absolute security. Despite Israel's robust economy and highly targeted defense spending on anti-suicide bombing measures, advanced missile defense like Iron Dome, and deep integration with U.S. Central Command's intelligence and logistics networks, Netanyahu's rhetoric often portrays Israel as being on the brink of destruction. This constant existential threat narrative, whether fully reflective of reality or not, compels a strategy of constant preemptive strikes.
Always needing to strike first because they feel threatened.
Yes. However, there's a powerful counterpoint to this strategy. Our source highlights that the most significant harm inflicted upon Israel in recent years came from Hamas on October 7, 2023. And Hamas, crucially, was an entity that Israel had previously underestimated, choosing instead to focus its resources and attention on perceived larger, more distant threats like Iran.
Focusing on the big threat while the closer one strikes.
Exactly. This illustrates a common and dangerous dynamic in international relations. The more a nation strives for absolute security through military means, the more it often alienates neighbors and creates resentment, making true sustainable security paradoxically harder to achieve. The core insight here is that the relentless pursuit of absolute security can, ironically, lead to greater insecurity by fueling a cycle of retaliation and isolation. It's a continuous cycle of threat perception and reaction that can spiral into deeper instability rather than definitive peace.
This deep dive into the Israel-Iran conflict has truly revealed its multi-layered and incredibly complex nature. It's far more than a simple news headline, encompassing intertwined military, political, and international dimensions that ripple across the globe.
Indeed. As we consider conflicts like this, which so profoundly impact global energy and stability, it raises an important question for all of us to reflect on. What does it truly mean to seek absolute security in an interconnected world? Is it an achievable goal, or does, as we've discussed, inevitably create more instability, both regionally and globally, by isolating states and fueling endless cycles of conflict?
A question well worth mulling over. We hope this deep dive has offered you valuable insights and encouraged your continued curiosity and exploration of complex global issues. We'll be here next time to help you make sense of another pressing topic.